Hello guys and welcome back to the next part of my Leopard 2A8 kit. Last time we constructed this kit, and this episode it's time to start painting and add some weathering. I deconstructed the tank into smaller sub-assemblies again and masked off any potential areas I don't want to paint. But before I can paint, I have to prepare the metal surfaces like the barrel and photo etched parts using Tamiya's metal primer. This liquid should help the paint to stick to the metal and prevent peeling. And then we can start painting. As usual, my go-to primer is a layer of Vallejo's Mecha Primer Black. So far the Mecha range has been without a flaw to me, even compared to Vallejo standard primers, which tend to be a bit less durable. A dark primer like black or brown is a great base for creating artificial shadows. But depending on what paints you use after priming, multiple coats may be required to cover the black base. As you may have seen in the thumbnail, I'm not painting a German leopard, but a Danish one instead. The Danish army uses a slightly different shade of green and not the usual NATO green. This is called SK80 and is a little lighter and more yellowish. To my knowledge, Hataka Hobby is the only manufacturer that provides this color premixed. And compared to the real color, they also hit the mixture quite well. Of course, you could also paint the Danish tank in NATO green, as the difference is only visible in a direct comparison, if at all, but I wanted to go a step closer to the original here. To thin it, I used the standard thinner from Vallejo. This is my first time using colors from Hataka, and I can say I haven't had any problems and the colors have a great coverage. And here is the green painted tank. On camera it is probably even more difficult to tell that this green tone is different, but if you have ever seen a real Danish leopard, you will realize that this shade is closer to the original than NATO green. The standard camouflage pattern of Danish tanks consists of only two colors, green and black. And the pattern itself is relatively simple, as only all four corners of the vehicle are black, as well as a central spot on the left side. Here you can use the usual NATO black again. Of course, there are currently no A8 variants in active service, so there is no example of a Danish A8 with a camouflage pattern, but at least one prototype is painted very similarly to the Danish tanks and is also included as painting instructions. Of course, you can also just look at the A5 and A7 variants, as the pattern will probably look very similar. I chose a Danish leopard for several reasons. On the one hand, it's a nice change to show leopards from other nations and not always just German vehicles. I have also seen Danish leopards myself during military exercises, which is why I wanted to capture these experiences with this model. Their camouflage pattern is so iconic to me that I could instantly recognize it anywhere. The rubber on the road wheels is painted with Ammo by Mix rubber and tires. Another interesting detail about the Danish Leopards is the fact that the road wheels are still painted in NATO green for some reason. And so that I don't have to paint all wheels individually with a brush, I use a simple circle stencil, which luckily has the exact diameter I need for the wheels. I don't think painting the wheels has ever been this easy for me on any model before. I will also make the tracks a little simpler than usual. Modern tracks are made of two materials, metal and rubber. When tracks are heavily worn, both materials look very different. However, this is a very new vehicle. I can paint everything in a grey tone because the wear will still be minimal. And to distinguish the rubber from metal, I will apply a lighter tone to the rubber pads using the dry brush technique. Now it is time to paint the details. The Leopard hubcaps have a small red dot in the middle where the lubricant is applied. For the machine gun, I chose a dark grey. I tried using gunmetal in the past, but that one is just a bit too shiny for me and starts looking less realistic on larger guns like this one. The ammunition belt is brass colored. But since metal colors only have a modest coverage with the brush, I will first prime the belt with yellow. Then I can apply the brass paint to it. I want to do highlight painting again. For this I need a lighter version of my base coat, in this case Reseda green. And then I have to pick out all the little details and raised areas one by one. This brings out the details better and breaks up the uniform color. But this is a completely optional step that not everyone has to like. I left the headlight lenses separate, but I can already paint the interior silver. The tools are painted with old wood and German grey. I paint the covers of the smoke launchers in black. First I paint a layer of silver over the rear lights. Then a coat of gloss translucent red is put on top. I decided to attach the tracks using double-sided tape on the top of the hull. These places won't be visible either, and then I won't have to try to wrap the tracks around the wheels under tension and, in the worst case, break them. Now the side skirts can finally be attached using super glue. For the decals I have to use a different set, as of course there are no Danish ones included. But the Leopard 2 A5DK from Hobby Boss has enough numbers to give away. And I won't need the coat of arms for the Hobby Boss set in the future. Now I will protect all previous work with a coat of matte clear varnish. After that I can start with the weathering effects. First step is a pin wash using this wash for NATO camo from AK. The matte surface made it a bit more difficult compared to glossy surface. To help the wash flow in areas with lots of details, I applied some white spirit to the surface first. Once the wash dried, I can clean up any mistakes with more white spirit. Next are some streaking effects. I chose two different tones for this one, a dust color and a darker grey tone. First, I apply vertical lines with a fine brush all over the side of the vehicle. Once I'm satisfied with the amount, I have to wait until they are dry to the touch. Now I take my weathering brush, moistened with white spirit, to blend them. I only move the brush vertically to simulate rundown dust and dirt. Depending on how strong I want this effect to be, I can apply new lines and blend them again. For the heavier matte effects, I am switching to the enamel matte effects from Ammo by MIG. I start by creating a heavy wash by thinning down a bit of matte with white spirit. I want the mixture to be liquid but not too translucent. This mix is then applied over all wheels, covering them completely. The base layer of all my matte effects on this vehicle will be dry matte. And don't worry, as soon as the effect starts to dry, it will be significantly toned down again. I mix the rest of the matte with more white spirit into a very thin wash, which I then distribute over the entire visible tracks. For all those areas where more matte accumulates, I use the effect undiluted directly from the bottle. I spread the matte along the bottom of the hull, focusing on the sides the higher I go. While traveling, mud from the tracks would collect here at the edge more than it would in the middle. When this mud is still fresh, it tends to form a smooth surface as it settles. To counteract this, I can stipple the surface with my brush to give the whole thing more texture. I apply the effect to both the front and rear of the vehicle. I can ignore the middle because you won't be able to see those parts anymore anyway. As soon as everything has started to dry a little, I use a brush with white spirit to blend the transition more smoothly. Still using the same color, I now apply the dust effect to the front of the tank. To do this, I diluted the mud again to a reasonably thin wash. I now distribute this mixture over the entire front up to about the height of the driver's hatch. This is the dust that is thrown up at the high speeds of modern tanks and collects on all horizontal surfaces in the direction of travel. I shouldn't forget the sides either, although real dust and sand are of course much more difficult to accumulate here. As long as the surface is still moist, I can start to build up the thicker deposits. To do this, I take some undiluted mud and carefully dab it over the underside of the side armor. Here the effect no longer simulates dust, but a thin layer of mud which would accumulate due to dirt splashing up. This means the effect can be more opaque and should start to create some texture if possible. And then it's time for more blending with white spirit. I applied a thin layer of AK's dust effects with my airbrush to give the whole tank some weathering. But that effect is basically invisible on camera. So far I only used one color for mud. But of course it can't stay that way. Next I use a slightly darker tone to simulate the fresher, still wet mud. I add the dark mud to all major dry mud areas, concentrating on the lower parts. I work carefully so as not to cover up my previous effects. After drying, this mud will also change its color slightly and become a bit lighter. Finer mud splashes can be made easily with a bristle brush and, for example, an old airbrush needle. Load up the brush with a small amount of mud and then flick it right above the surface you wanna add splashes. I suggest you try this out on a blank piece of paper first to get an idea of the size and range. Now distribute these splashes over the entire tank. It is important that the turret is also attached to the vehicle, as mud splashes can even reach it. The first effect I applied to the wheels wasn't as strong as I had hoped. That's why I'm going to spread more of the light material and blend it again with white spirit. And this is what the previous effects looked like after everything has completely dried. The color fits well for the sandy terrain in which I imagined the tank. However, I would like to increase the contrast a little more by adding a wet mud effect to the selected areas. I start with the wheels. If the ground is wet, moisture would collect via the tracks on the edge of the wheels and the mud would become darker again. However, it is important not to apply the mud too thick, as wet mud would make it harder to stick to the edge of the wheels when the vehicle is moving. Instead, I apply it like a slightly thicker wash and use the volume of the effects that I have already applied. It is a bit difficult to film, but here too I blend the effect with white spirit. I will also apply splashes of this wet mud over the lower hull using a brush and airbrush needle. When dry dirt becomes wet, a hard edge can often be seen. I tried to create this effect by diluting the wet mud back into a wash and then carefully applying it to the bottom edge without blending it further. After drying, a clearly visible edge should form and the bottom effect should have a slight shine. And with that, the Leopard is pretty much finished. Let's take a look at the final result. I think the tank turned out quite well. Or what do you think? Modern vehicles definitely require different techniques and tricks to really come into their own. But it's a lot of fun to have such variety with each new model. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to not miss any future uploads. Any feedback or suggestions, let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.